Thanks for tuning into the Just Go Play podcast, where we look to develop and promote a positive youth sports experience. As always, we are available for speaking and private engagements and can be reached at info@justgoplay.ca. You can also catch full video versions of our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to visit us at justgoplay.ca. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome back to the Just Go Play podcast, where we talk about what you need to create a positive sport experience. Podcast number 2. This is going to be kind of what's going right and what's going wrong in sport. So, Daryl, we have seen and we're learning and we're hearing about from all around the world. We want to share those to make people comfortable with saying, hey, listen, this is happening everywhere. We can't fix what we don't know is broken. So we can share those themes and we can have a pretty frank discussion, 50 minutes of fame discussion around what's going on right and what's going on wrong in the world. So, Daryl, why don't you kick us off? What are some of the things that you're seeing that are causing the decline in participation and fun? Because we know you're all about fun in the youth sports space.
All right, Matt, let's talk sport, man. The stuff I'm seeing is crazy. First of all, first thing is lack of free play. You know, that is the one thing I'm seeing at a really early stage. I'll even go back, I'll rewind. Lack of leadership. You know, we don't have the leaders to lead at the low end of the funnel. You know, they don't know what to do. They don't want to tell teachers. They don't want to tell parents. That would be the first thing I'm seeing: lack of leadership and lack of free play. When you know, kids are not, you know, out there discovering themselves at the early stages in life. They're not on the playground. They're not playing after school anymore. It's all organized.
That's a really good point. You know, when we live in a more organized society where everything's busy and the parents have this, it's check mark, it's 4 o'clock here, 5 o'clock here, 6 o'clock dinner, 7 o'clock this. You know, how do we dial it back? You know, our whole mantra, just go play. How do we dial that back as a parent for kids? I mean, we're going to talk about that in some of the upcoming episodes. We've got a great episode coming up with Gord McClelland from Working with Parents in Sport. So he's going to talk about the parents' role in sport. But just from the free play section, and we're going to talk about that in an upcoming podcast. You know, it's really good that you've hit on that, because these are some of the big things. And when you talk about leadership, you know, I really want to dive into that, because we've spent a lot of time with organizations at the semi-professional, professional, and Olympic Federation level. And it's really interesting to me to see that we've structured that whole sport pyramid, if you will, where all of the professional sports are at the top. The national sport organizations are underneath them. Then it goes to the provincial sport organizations. Then it goes to a new group called the Sportrepreneurs. And you and I both know that those Sportrepreneurs are men and women that have played rugby, played lacrosse, played basketball, and now all of a sudden they're kicked out into the system and they're saying, hey, listen, I can make some money on this because I played. I can start teaching kids and coaching kids, which, as we both know, doesn't really translate over all that well. Just because you're a good player doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach. But what happened was they started realizing that there was a whole market for this. So then we're looking at capitalism and its role in kind of eroding the integrity and ethics of sport. Whole new conversation on its own, but let's just keep following that pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid are the volunteers. So those are the well-intentioned, well-meaning community members, men and women that say, hey, listen, no one's here to coach, so I'll do it. Or no one's here to run this organization, so I'll do it. So when we always talk to the organizations and they asked us, Matt, Daryl, why is this a problem? We say, you've got the least educated and most self-interested people operating unchecked at the foundation of the sport pyramid. So I'll say that again. We've got the least educated and unsupported and most self-interested people operating with zero accountability at the foundation of the development phase. And when we talk to organizations, we say, this is a big opportunity, because this is a huge gap. Because what you guys should be and need to be doing is you need to be treating this whole sport business. It's a $2 billion a year business in North America with no CEO. You need to be treating this as a business like a franchisee-franchisor model. So follow me here. In a franchise model, you got the franchisor, and they're responsible for things like, buying power, decreasing the cost of the organizations, providing support to their franchisees. They come up with all the collateral, key messaging, marketing. Their job is to come down and support their franchisees to be the best that they can be. Now, it's not about controlling them, because in a franchise model, a lot of the innovation comes from the franchisees. If you take that over to the sport model, innovation should be coming from the provincial sport organizations or the NGBs in the states, national governing bodies. They're going to figure out, hey, we found some new innovation. They kick it up to the franchisor. The franchisor looks at that and says, yes, that's really good. Let's apply that to everybody equally. What we're seeing in our sports systems now are the big key sports, the soccers, the basketballs, the hockeys. They're really taking that market share because they're well funded. And so they're really doing some good things in terms of innovation around keeping people in sports, what they need to do, providing support. But a lot of these other organizations that aren't, we'll call them fringe sports, a lot of those other organizations don't get the same benefits because there's just not the same cachet, there's not the same budget, there's not the same money, there's not the same TV revenues. So really, I really like what you said about that lack of leadership. We really have to dive into that because we're all about solutions at Just Go Play. We're not all about the problems. So how are we going to, as a sport mass and population, how are we going to fix that? How are we going to really educate the least educated and well-intentioned? How do we help them create that quality sport experience? How do we manage and govern and hold those sport entrepreneurs who are shelling out money and then realize that in order to make a living, they got to keep that kid in sport all year round, which everyone knows is contra to quality sport development? How do we govern those people? How do we look at those people? What do you think, Daryl? What are some of the things that you've seen, some of the ideas there?
Well, as you said, those sport entrepreneurs have turned sport at this youth level into a pay-for-play society. You've heard we say this all the time with each other, Matt, is if you want to learn how to play something, you got to pay. If you want to learn how to play hockey, you want to be a better hockey player, they make it that you have to pay. You can't just go learn on the street. You can't go learn in school. That, again, we'll touch upon that about the educational system. What we need to do is we need to basically learn how to, it's got to go right from the organization. The top of the organization, an organizational alignment has to decide that we can't just focus on the elite. We're only focusing on the 1% instead of the 99, 95%. If you don't make it into that 1%, 2%, they ignore you. They treat you like you have a disease, and they treat you like you don't really want to develop. It's like, okay, you're a house leaguer, you're in the house. He just wants to play. He doesn't really care about getting better. And we've lost the sight of that. And these guys might be late bloomers. Who says they don't want to develop? We've ignored them, Matt. So that's what I feel is the biggest problem. Is we're so focused on those sportpreneurs. They don't care about the 99%. They care about those top 1-2%, because those guys are going to shell out the money, and they feed them into that system that you're going to get a scholarship, you're going to make the show, or whatever sport it is, basketball, soccer, hockey. Those are the things we have to control. And I don't know the full answer. I know maybe some of the solutions, but this is where we're going right now, is down that road, is how we fix this.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Daryl. It's hey, listen, we both know the answer. We need sport leadership that's got some cojones at the top of the food chain here to really start saying, hey, listen, we're going to manage this better. We're going to govern this better. Nowhere would you have a $2 billion a year business without a CEO. Nowhere. In no job would that last. No industry, no sector. And you brought up a really good point about the 1% elite pathway that we seem to force on everybody else. And as a matter of fact, I would even challenge you that we do take some of the house people into those academies, because we need them to pay for the 1%, the 1%, and we feed them the lies and say, yeah, you're a good player based on what? We're going to talk about in podcasts what is athlete development? What really is authentic athlete development? What does it look like? Because if parents don't know what it looks like, it's really hard for them not to fall for that and get into that. And you made a really good point. Listen, we're not getting the best players. We're getting the players that can afford to send their kid to academies. That's not the best players. That's not the talent. And we're seeing that it's starting to show up at the junior levels, at the higher levels of sport, all sport, not just one sport. We're starting to see that creep in where we don't necessarily have the best. We've just got the people that could afford the price point of sport. And that's really dangerous. It's really dangerous in terms of physical education, which we're going to talk about, and it's really dangerous in sport. So, okay, so we got the sport pyramid. We've got the least educated and most self-interested people. That's an issue. Some of the other issues, the top 5 things that we talk about, Daryl, are the decrease in free play, which we're going to hit in a whole podcast. We're going to talk about the decreased free play. Number 2, we've got the marginalization of physical education in schools. And we're going to have Glenn Young, who is one of the top educators in our country, talk about what's going right and what's going wrong in physical education in schools. Number 3, we got the lack of fundamental movement skills. It stands to reason if we're not engaging in free play and we're marginalizing phys ed, how are we going to learn our fundamental movement skills? Fundamental movement skills: run, jump, kick, catch, throw, two-hand. Like all these skills that you would naturally and intuitively learn are being minimized. So if you don't have the fundamental movement skills, you're not going to get into the fundamental sport skills. So, yeah. 4th reason is the early sport specialization. And you talked about that, and we talked about why. We're going to get into detail about that because that's a real big one. And the 5th one is basically technology. So we know, everyone knows technology is now a part of our DNA. We're on the phones, we're on the devices all the time. So that's going to be a big, big issue as we go forward into salvaging the sport, because it's the technology eliminates the work. It eliminates the effort. You can go on it, you can die, you can start over again. It's bringing the fun friends and kids into, you're bringing the experience to the kids. They don't have to go out and get it. So that's going to be a big issue. And then the last one you hit is cost. I mean, we're costing talent. We're pricing talent right out of sport. So good conversation. That's our 15 minutes of fame. Daryl, what do you think going forward is, out of those 6 things, is the biggest factor?
The biggest factor out of those 6 things? Well, it's in there. It's leadership. First of all, would be the biggest one. I would probably say education. Like, we need to figure out a way to touch more people in schools, because that's where everybody goes. Everyone goes to school. So we know, even if you're not in a sports team or not a sports organization, if we can touch more people in school, if we work on that system, that everyone has a fitness test. It's okay to tell a kid he's dumb, but it's not okay to tell a kid he's out of shape. I don't get that, right? So I personally think that's the area, if we can figure out something at the educational system which transfers into the sports organizations in terms of baseline testing kids, and prescribing what kids can do, and giving them time to play and develop with the right people, of course.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not comparing them to a norm or a standard. It should be comparing them to themselves. Just like in any other literacy and subject matter, it's you versus you. And I think that's where that whole standardized act went wrong. It said, if you can't do this amount of chin-ups, you're blah blah blah. You're not good. And that's not really what it's about. It's about, like you said, establishing a baseline of here is where I am in these skills, and we're talking life skills here, like the running, jumping, catching, pulling up, body weight. Like, these are life skills. You need these skills for life.
That's why it should be in school. So that's why when you ask that, it's like school. If I didn't teach your kid how to read, you'd be upset, right? So now I think it's just as important as teaching a kid to read and write. So if we do that, that's where we'll see the biggest change.
All right, perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk about schools in one of our upcoming podcasts with Glenn Young. So we'll stay away from that. We'll pepper him as to why it's not going on and what's happening. But until then, hey, listen, thanks for tuning into podcast number 2. We talked about some of the big things, some of the big issues, shared some insights, and now it's time to just go play. Until next time.